Good morning, part ones. It's Monday, July the 17th, and we're halfway through the course, 2 weeks left. And so we're starting today with morality and ethics. I do have to give you back some feedback from scripture, but I'm just going to introduce this first, and I'll send a video later this week with some feedback on scripture. Do a little bit with this today because scripture lends itself to everything. And then then we start sacraments later this week, so I'll have to send you guys another video. But in the meantime, I wanted to unpack the one gospel passage that's used primarily in this module, which is Matthew's Sermon on the Mount. And instead of using the gospel of the day, which I wanted to do with you guys, I'll spend my time and focus on that and just do a little bit of an exegesis. So what I'm actually going to try to do today also is give you a little bit of feedback indirectly in terms of all those questions you had about scripture. So let's see how this goes. So morality and ethics is really central. I mean, everything's central. Scripture central. We're sacramental, so sacraments will be really important. But in terms of human behavior, morality is a real challenge. Morality and ethics is a real challenge to us as human beings. And just even myself working in the Catholic system for so many years, I would sometimes stand back and question and say, is this ethical? Do these people understand morality? And I'm talking about some of the leaders in Catholic education. So even within our own community, there's a real discrepancy in terms of how we view the teachings of the church when it comes to issues of conscience, morality, ethics, what's right, what's wrong. And this is a really tough area because with Vatican II in 63 to 65, I showed you that big document in my last video, with the last Vatican Council, things changed in the church, and that's why there's a group of Catholics that really have a difficult time with Vatican II and actually prefer to step back in history and focus on issues before Vatican II. But Vatican II allowed us to be more, to take more ownership of our faith, and this is going to actually answer some of the questions you guys had about scripture as well. Prior to Vatican II, we as Catholics really did not read the Bible. And this actually explains a lot of why we're kind of behind in terms of knowing our faith as part of our Christian churches. So with the Protestant Reformation, with when the big schism with Martin Luther, they took a different approach to relating to our scripture, and they know it well. I always joke. I always say I wish I was brought up Protestant and then converted to Catholicism, because then I would really know the Bible. I can't go toe to toe with another Christian in terms of scripture, even though they might not have ever taken theology courses, because they're brought up in this tradition of really understanding and reading their scripture. We as Catholics, until Vatican II, the Bible was more like a family Bible, a symbol in the family home, and you did not really read the Bible. You as a Catholic, you didn't unpack it, you didn't understand. Somebody else did it for you on Sunday. The priest unpacked it for you. But now, with Vatican II, the emphasis is on the laity, and I talked about this in my last video. There's more of a decline of the clergy. There's more laity in the church, us, the non-ordained, and we need to take ownership of understanding our faith story. So we as Christians, Catholic Christians now we are encouraged to read the Bible and study the Bible. See, it's not really in our tradition. If you talk to Pentecostals and Protestants and Baptists, they do Bible study. It's part of their faith culture. For us, it's just kind of new. It's not in our consciousness, right? So that's why I really encourage Catholic educators to do their Masters in Religious Education, because then it gives us that background, gives us those tools. Some of the questions that you guys had with the scripture section was about giving a homily. We can't say homily as a layperson. Like, I give homilies as a chaplain, but I can't refer to it as I'm giving a homily. That is reserved for the clergy. But I can do a reflection on scripture. And those of you who had that question, I think that would be awesome if every morning you took the reading of the day, and this could be on your phone on an app, and started your day with your students by reading what the gospel was, and then unpacked it for your students. How does this speak to us today? How does this story from thousands of years ago actually have relevance for us today? What is God saying to us today? Because God speaks to us every day. We just have to unpack the little, the mystery behind it, right? So it almost would be like a fun activity for you and your students to figure out, what's God saying today? And put the onus on them. What do they think? And then pick up a commentary. I left my commentary back at home, but I printed off a commentary offline today for the Sermon of the Mount. And you yourself, if you're not familiar with that passage, read a commentary before you get to school that day. So as part of your prep, as your lesson planning, read the Gospel the night before. Do you have something to say about it? Do you understand it? If not, look it up on a commentary. Make sure it's a Catholic commentary. The reason why I know this one online is a Catholic commentary is I went to the sources, and part of their research is the Jerome Biblical Commentary, which is a Catholic commentary. So until you get familiar with the different commentaries and the different faith traditions, it's good to double check to make sure you're getting your perspective from a Catholic perspective. And then when you study scripture, it's great to get commentaries from different theologians from different Christian traditions, and then you can compare and contrast and do that exegesis that we do with scripture. So I didn't intend to go all the way through scripture, but here we go. I had to do that in order to introduce what I'm going to do with morality and ethics. So I'm going to unpack the Sermon of the Mount, because that is the scripture passage that you guys are going to focus on in this module. And that being said, going back to the issue of morality and ethics, God has given us, foundational pieces. The Ten Commandments, huge. Old Testament, Moses. Moses was the primary figure in Old Testament history, in the Hebrew scriptures. The story of the Israelites. He was kind of like the hero, just as Jesus is the hero in the New Testament, the Christian scriptures, the Christian stories. So those two volumes put together become our Bible. So even though we are not Jewish, we acknowledge our Jewish roots. Jesus was a Jew, and a part of our story is part of the Jewish tradition. So that's probably answering some of the scripture questions that you guys had. And then, people have a weak moral fiber. So it's interesting. I think that's part of one of the challenges that God, in God's great wisdom and mystery of God's wisdom, is he gave us this gift of free will, but the caveat was, we have to make decisions. So ultimately we are decision makers. And that becomes tough because we can fall into something called moral relativism. And that's sort of what I started talking about earlier when I was talking about, even leaders in Catholic education. Sometimes I shake my head and think, really? You think that's moral? You think that's ethical? But we tend to make things wrong right, or not fully explore certain issues to understand it in its entirety and make decisions on partial understandings of things. And then again, our moral decision making can be compromised because we haven't taken the steps to do the research and get the full picture. So wow, so this is complicated. So Vatican II gave us this open door. It was John 23rd who came into power in the church. He became the Pope. He was elected. And at the time, it was interesting how God works, because he was not expected to be a big presence in the church. There was no one really at that time. He's sort of like a transition Pope. They kind of thought, he's not going to rock the boat. He's not too healthy. He's not going to last that long. Well, he didn't last that long, but he rocked the boat big time, because he was known to open up the windows of the church, let the fresh air in, and basically turn the church around with Vatican II. Architecturally, churches after Vatican II, you could tell there's a difference. It was more communal. The altar got moved up. The priest was turned around. The priest used to celebrate Mass with his back to the congregation. There was a communion rail. There was all kinds of different things liturgically that I can't get into right now. But the biggest thing was the ownership to the laity. Now I'm going full circle. I'm coming back to where I started. And along with reading the Bible, you know, there was more of a gray area in terms of what's right, what's wrong. Prior to Vatican II, it was either right or wrong. With Vatican II, there's that informed conscience, there's that gray area that developed that a lot of Catholics are not comfortable with, and thus it leads to a lot of moral relativism, where people think people are making up their own rules, their own rights or wrongs with the church. So, so for example, let's get into decision making. What you're going to be learning in this module is about forming your conscience, and that's huge. So, you know, when you have a tough decision, do you do the research? You know, you can say, well, you know, that's my decision. I think that's right for me, and go ahead and do that decision. But what's the outcome of that decision? Who are you hurting? Are you hurting yourself? Are you hurting others? What are you violating? Because essentially, even if we've done like all the research and, you know, with our decisions, we do tend to hurt people either directly or indirectly. But we want to minimize the amount of pain we cause ourselves and others. So, you know, as a Catholic Christian, I need to have a formed conscience. You as Catholic educators have to help your students form their conscience, and that's through education. And that's again what Vatican II gave us, that ability to start educating ourselves. You know, if Vatican II didn't happen, I would have never had a degree in theology. I would have never been led into the faculty of theology as a woman, as a lay person, right? So we're allowed to get that education. So let's get educated. So what do you do when you form your conscience? You got to pray about it. You got to reflect about it. You got to talk to the experts. So, you know, talk to someone who knows something about the issue that you're dealing with. Talk to your parish priest. You may not agree with him, but talk to him. Get that perspective. Talk to your family. Do the reading. Consult the catechism. This unpacks what the church teaches for us. You know, read scripture, and then, you know, once you've gone through that process of search, make your decision based on that. Now, I know not every decision is going to be that. I'm talking about the big decisions in your life that, you know, potentially that deal with life and death. You know, the church, its foundational piece is the dignity of human life. Decisions that the church makes is based on that concept of all life deserves dignity. Is your decision violating the dignity of human life? That's huge. If it is, stop and think. You may not be making the right decision. Consistent ethic of life, you know, from the cradle to the grave, you know, we make decisions about life and death. And that has to be a huge factor in our decision-making process as Catholic Christians. For example, those are the big issues. But even in terms of your decision making, if you've got a strongly formed conscience, if you do this on a regular basis, even the little decisions you make can change your life and somebody else's life. I always say we make decisions from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed. So even in the morning when you get up and you press the snooze button, you might think minimal, like that's not going to impact anyone's day. But if you continue to press the snooze button and you're late, it starts to have big effects on people. If you have family in your house, you're going to be grumpy. You're going to set off somebody else's day in a negative road. You run out of the house, you get on the road, you start making different decisions. Are you going to take that yellow light, or are you going to stop, as you should? If you go through that yellow light and turns red, you get into an accident. You've just, you know, that is a big moral decision. Even though at the moment that you're panicking, you got to get to work, you're not thinking about it, right? That's how, you know, small, from the snooze button to decisions about, you know, does this, you know, impact someone's life or death? That's the spectrum of decision making for us as Catholic Christians. It is huge. And so when you're doing this particular module, really take into account, how have you been making decisions in your life? Have you been praying about it? Have you been bringing into your decision-making process what the church teaches, whether you agree with it or not? And you're allowed to disagree. There's I'll have to, when I do the next video, I will talk about where and here, you know, if you've gone through that process of search, ultimately, you can make your own decision. based on the fact that you have to deal with the consequences. Because every time we make decisions, it could end up being great, it could be life-giving, but you also have to be prepared that it may not be life-giving. And that's why that process of search helps us, because we're going to have to deal with the negative outcome, and that might be really traumatic for us in our lives, and we're going to need our faith, and we're going to need to get consoled. Anyways, I'm running out of time on this video. I'm going to have to continue into part 2 because morality is huge and I have a lot to say. Stay tuned.